Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me. Whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording, I appreciate you watching. Last week we started talking about assessing websites using dev tools, and this week we're talking about a specific dev tool that I think takes a lot of the dev tools and really it automates things. It makes our lives a lot easier. And it is a dev tool called Lighthouse, and this is a dev tool that is specific to Chrome and Chromium-based browsers. So if you have Chrome, if you have Opera, if you have whatever that's based on Chrome or Chromium, it's built into it. If you use Firefox primarily, you can get Lighthouse as an extension. But you would need to get it, to my knowledge, you would need to get it as an extension to the Mozilla Firefox browser. But it is something that is available. And this is something that takes a lot of the things that we looked at last week when we looked at a lot of the tabs and a lot of the different things. And it takes the information, kind of assesses it for you, and gives you some recommendations based on the results. So I just want to show you some examples of how you can use this. Honestly, this is probably the best tool you can use to kind of build a foundation for that part of the final project, as far as all of that goes. So this is probably, one of the more useful things that we have here is Lighthouse. And so one of the first things that we want to do as we kind of get started today is we want to start off by kind of just reviewing a little bit and talk about why we want to assess website quality. And so when we think about building a website, right, one of the things that we've talked about in the past is that once we build a website, we can talk about building a website to an extent, but then that website's not really finished, right? A website's never really done. In the design class, for example, we talk about a website being a living entity, right? So that you can add your code and you can add your content and you can do a lot of work on it, but it's never really done, right? There's no real finishing point. You can go back, you can make changes, you can edit things, you can fix things, you can do various things as you kind of progress to make changes and to work with things. And it's never really done, so you have to have some kind of metric by which you can say, okay, well, that's good enough. And we can kind of look at it to a degree and say, okay, visually, this is good enough. But, visuals and the way things work from a, just direct interactive standpoint is one thing. When we get into the idea of performance, that's something that's completely different, right? And that's something that we might not necessarily be able to identify and work with on our own. Is, the idea of performance and being able to see how our website performs and figure out things that can improve our website's performance. So really the best way to measure quality of our website is by knowing really how our users use it, what our users think about it, and the performance that, is kind of thrown into the mix there. But that isn't always possible, right? So we use those kind of things to help us out here. So we use these tools to help us out. We can use tools like we looked at last week with our dev tools to kind of help us out. But one of my favorite tools that we can use to deal with this is Lighthouse. So what exactly is Lighthouse? Lighthouse is an automated tool by Google that was created for assessing and improving the quality of web pages. So it has audits for multiple different categories with specific details for each. So not only does it tell you, what's wrong, right? It actually gives you a score in each of these multiple categories. It tells you specifically areas in which you can improve, and it gives you suggestions for improvement and actually things that you can do to improve your site. So really, when it comes to things like kind of what we're doing when we're thinking about the concept of what we would do with dev tools and how we would work with them, it kind of encapsulates everything that we would need to do here. Right? We can use it to assess our site. We can get a score in various areas. And based on that score, we can get suggestions for what we can improve. And then make decisions on whether or not we find it necessary to improve those things. Right? Because some things are going to be slight improvements and some things are going to be major improvements. Right? So basically it takes a lot of stuff that we were kind of doing last week when we were looking at the things like time to first paint and all that other stuff, in some of the DevTools tabs that we were kind of doing manually there, and it does it for us, which is incredibly, incredibly helpful. Right, so here are the criteria. Some of the criteria that Lighthouse assesses websites on. One is performance. Right, so just how well the website performs. Two is best practices. Is the website built using best practices? If not, how can we build it using better best practices? 3 is search engine optimization. 4 is accessibility. And 5 is progressive web application, or PWA. So for our purposes in this program that we're in, we primarily only discuss 1, 2, and 4. There, we don't talk much about search engine optimization. We mention a little bit of search engine optimization here and there. Search engine optimization, in my opinion, is more of a marketing skill than a web design and development sort of skill, which is why I don't really talk about that much. It is a very good and marketable skill to have if it's one that you want to try to hone. It is one that could be discussed. Like, I know some basic things about search engine optimization that can help us out there. But when I'm talking about search engine optimization, just so you understand what I mean when I say that, what I'm meaning is when you see pages ranked on Google or Bing or whatever search engine that you use, the order in which those pages are displayed to you gets determined by a series of criteria. This series of criteria is composed within an algorithm, right? So we have this sequence that is looked at when the site is examined by the search engines to find terms that are relevant to the site, and then how highly to rank that website among items with those terms. Right, and so that's how search engine optimization works. Typically, we can get a lot of organic search engine optimization, which is something that we talk about in the social media class through backlinks on social media. So if you're referencing things on your website, or if you have a blog where you're posting material on your website, instead of reposting that material elsewhere, posting it on your website and then posting a link to that material on other social sites, then that are also using keywords that you want to rank highly in, which is one of the ways that we can improve SEO or search engine optimization. Progressive web applications. Progressive web applications, we might discuss those briefly in the spring in the emerging web technologies course. A progressive web application is a bit of an interesting thing. It's kind of like a next generation website type of situation. One of the things that makes a progressive web application interesting is that a progressive web application typically can be installed, so it can be used also offline, among other things. So that's also something that's kind of interesting, but it's kind of outside the scope of what we're doing, just because it's more of a it's a newer thing. It's more, it would fall in the line of one of those more emerging web technologies types of things, which is why I'm considering covering some of that material in the emerging web tech course in the spring. So kind of think about that for the progressive web app course in the spring. But how do we run Lighthouse? What do we do when we run Lighthouse? We can run Lighthouse in any browser using the Lighthouse browser extension. Or if you have a Chromium-based or Chrome-based browser, it is built right into the browser. So we'll see that in just a minute. I'll use Chrome for my demonstrations this week, just like I did last week. I say I prefer the extension here because it makes it easy. Honestly, with the advancements between the extension and what they have integrated into the browser since this presentation was created, it is basically the same now, right? Because it used to be that Lighthouse was not its own tab in DevTools. Now it has its own tab in DevTools in Chromium-based browsers. You used to have to kind of type in some special hotkeys to get it pulled up, whereas with the browser extension, you just had to click on the extension and you could get it. But now it has its own special tab in the DevTools, so it's basically the same. Easy peasy. And we'll see. We'll do a real world example in just a few minutes, but we can look at kind of the results that we will see. Right, and by default, you'll get some overall results that look like this. And this is a real report, and we'll run a new report on Amazon.com from today to see how this report from several years ago compares to a new report run on Amazon.com from today. But you can run a report on any website you want to see the statistics from that website, right? Which is one of the interesting things. So it can give you some information about websites that exist and show you some different things about it. So I want to run a few of these, and then we'll kind of go into the different scores a little bit deeper, right? Like I have some slides that talk about the different scores, but I think kind of going through and just looking at some of the processes kind of tells us a little bit more about what's going on here, which I think is more relevant and just better. So we can kind of look at that. So we saw those scores, and we'll bring those back if we need to there. But let's head over to Amazon.com, where we can run our Lighthouse. So to get to Lighthouse, I'm just going to open up our DevTools. We'll just inspect, and we can see that there's a tab here called Lighthouse. And so that's the tab that I want, right? It's the tab called Lighthouse. I will click that, and we see we have different modes here to generate a report. I can generate it for all of the categories, or I can pick the categories that I want to be specific about. I can generate it on mobile or desktop. So I can see how it loads on mobile versus how it loads on desktop. It'll actually simulate a mobile experience in this case. And I can have a different mode here, which is relatively new. But it's just a user flow type of situation in terms of what it does. By and large, if you use navigation, navigation is the standard mode. So what we'll do here for our first practice is I will run into navigation mode on desktop and for all categories, and we will analyze page load. And you see when I click analyze page load, it will refresh the site. And once it refreshes the site, it will take some time to analyze the things that it saw, the data that it collected as the page loads. And you can see that it's doing some other stuff while it's going through. Right, and so this is a new Lighthouse report from Amazon.com. When we compare that to the old one, we can see that they got some better scores back whenever I made this presentation originally than they did today. And that's partially because of how they've changed the algorithm in terms of what Lighthouse calculates and what the Google search engine is looking for in terms of rankings and all this kind of stuff. Right, and so we can look here. We got an 82 in performance, which is actually improved performance versus what we got in the old on the old report. A 78 in accessibility, a 75 in best practices, a 75 in SEO, and a non-applicable in PWA. And if we go through here, we can actually see some views, and we can, if we notice here, the data that it's talking about, a lot of the data that it's talking about here is some of the data that we saw last week as we were examining some of the tabs and things while we were looking through DevTools in general. Right, and so if we expand the view, we can actually get more information here. And we can see that the cumulative layout shift is one of the items here that scored relatively low. And it says that cumulative layout shift measures the movement of visible elements within the viewport. And if we click that more details there, we can learn more about what this means. We see that cumulative layout shift is an important user-centric metric for measuring visual stability because it helps quantify how often users experience unexpected layout shifts. And so basically we want something that is, I believe we are looking at a score from 0 to maybe 1 here. And it looks like anything higher than 0.25 is in the poor range. Anything higher than the 0.1 is in the needs improvement range. But when you are dealing with a responsive website, by and large, you are going to get a lot of cumulative layout shift, right? Because you know, what's happening with your cumulative layout shift is that, you know, it's resizing and changing, which we see here, you know, as we resize the page, we see things shrinking and growing and moving around. So while that might be annoying a little bit if my browser is moving a lot, you know, if I'm Amazon, that might be something that I don't want to worry about, right? And we see, you know, things that are going to take up a lot of time. in terms of performance. Things like my first contentful paint, my largest contentful paint, my blocking time are all in the green here, right? They're all rated very well. Speed index here is in the yellow. Speed index could use a little bit of improvement, as is time to interactive. Time to interactive might be on the borderline of red there. 3.2 seconds seems a little bit slow. If we click learn more on that, we can figure out kind of where their cut scores are on that metric. There we are. Okay, so actually we're on the cusp of being in the green here, as it is. Over 7.3 seconds as time to interactive, being slow. So with what we have here being 3.2 seconds, and actually according to their own metric here, which might be something that they've changed and not updated, the color coding for 3.2 seconds should be in the green, should be fast. Based on what they have here in their learn more for time to interactive, which is interesting, right? That it's yellow here in our results, but green in their learn more. So that might be something that, somewhere where they have a discrepancy, right? Which you see a lot of information here. Here in the opportunities, you can see some places where you can fix things, right? Defer off-screen images, so load them later. Basically, lazy loading off-screen images would be, or asynchronously loading off-screen images, right? It says there, consider lazy loading off-screen and hidden images, so that they load after all, after all the critical stuff loads. And that could save you up to, 1.04 seconds. Right? And 1 second doesn't sound like much time, right? It's simply 1 second. But 1 second in terms of, a website load trims off a pretty significant bit, right? When we're looking at something that, seemingly typically happens instantaneously, that is significant. Right, some other suggestions that it gives us here: reduce unused JavaScript. Right, so again, it talks about lazy loading and deferring scripts. Serve images in next-gen formats. Probably not a great idea, since some of the next-gen formats are losing their support. But I want to say AVIF is actually losing its support. Even though next-gen formats are, for all intents and purposes, higher compression while still maintaining a good image quality, right? We're talking a whole bunch of images here, and we're only talking about saving a third of a second. Probably not a big deal for us. Properly sizing images as well, making sure our images fit without having to resize them via code. Again, we're saving 1/10 of a second there, 2/10 of a second. Not a big deal. Tells us some other things to do here that can help if we're Amazon. Right? Things like avoid an excessive DOM size. As you can probably imagine, the DOM of the Amazon homepage is huge. It says there's over 3,000, almost 4,000 elements there. It's a big network payload. Lots of stuff going on there. And so that gives us insight as to why the performance score was an 82. We can see that our accessibility score here is a 78. And it tells us why. And it looks like the majority of the reasons here are, looks like we're missing a lot of ARIA here. So a lot of this is ARIA, WAI. Elements with ARIA role that require children to contain a specific role are missing children. Role value not valid. ARIA hidden true. Elements contain focusable descendants. Right, and from an accessibility standpoint, those in particular aren't huge issues, but they can cause some problems. Here we have some larger problems in terms of alt text, right? Images do not have alt attributes. Although it only pulls back one image and it seems to be a loading bar. So they probably can just put an empty alt attribute into that. Define it as decorative and, you know, get another point or two for that item. Links do not have a discernible name. We can see, you know, where they're using image links here. Looks like a bit of a problem. And then there are list items that are not in ordered list or unordered lists, which cause a bit of a problem as well. But we can also see that there are 23 past audits here that we can look at. A lot of those involve ARIA and HTML5. Right, so not only is it telling us, you know, it gives us a score, it tells us, you know, gives us a general idea of how accessible our website is, but it tells us what we can fix and where we can go to fix it, right, which is pretty good. Best practices. One here is using a deprecated API. Event.path. Deprecated. Use event.composed path. Shows where that is in their JavaScript. Browser errors logged to the console. You can see them down here. Various other things that are problems here. SEO. And finally, PWA. And we see that it's not installable. No service worker for installability. So it's not a PWA. And so we can save this, or we can, you know, copy some JSON out of this, save JSON from this, you know, print it out, do some various things from this. Right, just do some work from this as well. If we did this same thing, I'm going to close that up and reopen the inspect again. I just want to do the same thing again, but this time do it in mobile view, just so we can see what it does for mobile. We can see it puts it in a little fake mobile phone here, just so it emulates the environment. And it's going through the exact same sort of thing. And it gives me some scores here. And we can see here that it actually gives me better search engine optimization and better accessibility in the mobile environment than it does on the desktop environment. Probably because some of the things that were hidden on the desktop environment are shown in the mobile environment. And those things that were hidden in the desktop environment were some of the things that might have been causing issues. But we can also see that on the mobile environment, you know, with some of the things here being kind of on the cusp and heavier duty kind of items, we can see that it is less performant. The performance score is a lot lower. We can see our contentful paints and things of that nature having, really bad scores here. And you can look and see all the things that are going on here. Going through, right? Looks like a lot of the JavaScript causing the issues here. Off-screen images again. Basically the same stuff, just now it's kind of, in the environment of a more restrictive mobile environment. So another one of the things that I also like to do is I also like to look at the Cleveland Community College website whenever we do this. So let's have a look at the Cleveland Community College website. Let's give that a little inspector-rooney. Using Lighthouse here, we'll start off with the desktop view. And we'll analyze that page load. We'll just see how it goes. So we could probably expect some things like unused code to be an issue, kind of the things that we've seen previously. So we could probably expect some things like that to come back up and be an issue again. Right, just based on the experience and the things that we know about the CCC website from last week. But let's bring out some other things that that we see here. That's interesting. It errored out. Let's try to run it again. I know it works. I definitely have run Lighthouse on the page before. So we'll just give it another try here, see if it works. It looks like it's doing a little bit better this time. There we go. There we go. We can see performance score really low, right? We can improve that performance a lot. A lot of that has to do with things like WordPress and the current. And so WordPress uses a lot of extra files that aren't brought into the, that aren't necessarily, used with the site. The main site's also got Bootstrap used in it. And jQuery, so it's bringing all of those library files into it that are slowing things down a little bit. Although one of the things that we can see here that, our server isn't the problem. Right, our server is actually pretty zippy. Because our server got us our first contentful paint in 0.6 seconds. So the server is pretty fast. But our total blocking time here seems to be a bit of an issue. If we look at our total blocking time, it's the sum of all time periods between FCP and time to interactive when task length exceeds 50 milliseconds. So that's the time between the first contentful paint and the time to interactive when the task that it is doing exceeds 50 milliseconds. So we had over 1.5 seconds here, basically, where the task that it was trying to do exceeded 50 milliseconds. So if you kind of look at that in perspective, basically that is, there's 1,000 milliseconds in a second, right? So that's happened a lot here with our total blocking time. And that's our biggest issue here. And if we look down at our suggestions here, eliminate render blocking resources, right? And if we look at what those are, we see right there, there's the big WordPress logo. WordPress plugins are, our big render blockers. That we're dealing with there. Reduce unused JavaScript, right? The things that we talked about. Again, WordPress logo. Now, one place where we exceed, right here, accessibility, 98. A 98 accessibility, which is amazing. And there's only really one asset here that did not pass. And I believe it's because we don't have a background color behind the hero video there. I believe if I expand that, we'll find that out. Oh, no, it's actually on that button. Saying the button actually failed the contrast check. And that is true. I think we actually have to use a different green on the website in general. Because white over the CCC green that's in the logo does not have enough contrast for a standard accessible contrast ratio. So if they put the wrong green on that button there that is in that view, that is possible. But that is the only issue that Lighthouse is calling out for that, which is great. An 83 here in best practices is really good. It says we're using a deprecated API, but it doesn't tell us which one we're using that is deprecated. Logging issues. And it looks like both the issues that were logged were from our buddy Chip here. Detecting JavaScript libraries, which of course it has jQuery in there, so there is that. Everything else is pretty good. And SEO. SEO is pretty high here. One link without descriptive text, and that is the COVID-19 information. And if we look, it's because... I think it's because it's in a button. Is that a button? Oh, no, it's in there as an after. It's in there after, as content for an after? No? No, I think he might have just misapplied it. I think that is correct. I think that is the correct way to handle it. I think it might just be... a bit off base there. So now we can run it in Lighthouse, see how much difference it is. Or run it in mobile mode, run Lighthouse in mobile mode, see how much difference that is. And we should be able to see, right, like if running Amazon in mobile mode impacted the performance that much, we should see huge performance impacts here, since performance is already pretty bad. So we should be able to see that kind of work here. Although it doesn't have the video in mobile mode, it replaces that with an image. So it might be okay. We can kind of see how that works here. Figure it out. Oh, yeah. Yeah, kind of as expected there. 16 in performance. Pretty abysmal. Took 6 seconds to get to first contentful paint. Although by default, right, I think these are 3G speeds that it does by default here in mobile mode. So you know, with where we're at geographically, that might be fair, because you could have some more, you know, rural individuals out to where they can't get 4G service, where they're still having to get 3G. But 4G is going to be way faster than that. 4G is going to be more comparable to the broadband speeds. that we were getting from the desktop load. So, but we can see 3G speeds here, downright abysmal. 6 seconds to the first contentful paint, nearly 20 seconds to the largest contentful paint and the TTI. Just wild. Although we can see here accessibility, since that button is gone in the mobile view, accessibility is at 100 in the mobile view, which is great. Best practices could be improved. SEO could be improved on mobile. Right, lots of information we could get and go through there as well. And so as we're kind of looking through here, one of the things that, one of the best, really one of the best ways that I can kind of suggest you all kind of get accustomed to working with Lighthouse is to just pick a site and try it out. See the information that it gives you and work with it and get the results. I think you'll be surprised about what you get. And with that being said, I think that's all for today. So, thank you for watching. We'll turn the music back on and hang out and chat just in case anybody has any questions. If you're watching the recording and you have some questions, please send me an email or a Teams message, and we will answer your questions to the best of our ability. But again, that's all that I got for you for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.